everyone, and welcome to Aldersgate Online. No matter where you're watching, we're so honored that you've decided to spend the next 40 minutes or so with us today. These next 40 minutes will consist of worship, teaching, and discussion questions at the end for some reflection. If you're new with us at church today, I especially want to welcome you to Aldersgate. We're so glad you're here. To celebrate, we would love to pledge a $5 donation on your behalf to an organization of your choice. Simply head to aldersgate.info and click on the Connect form. From there, fill out the form, select the I'm New checkbox, and we'll send you an email asking which organization you wish for us to donate to. If you have been impacted by one of our experiences, then please take a moment and share this on whatever platform you are on right now. Here at Aldersgate, we long to see as many people as possible impacted by this life-transforming message. And this is the easiest and most efficient way to spread the word about this awesome community of faith. If you would like to partner with us in the work that we're doing here at Aldersgate in Lubbock and around the world, please head over to aldersgate.info, where there's an opportunity for you to become a regular giving partner. Everything we do here at Aldersgate is because of your generosity, and we just want to say thank you in advance for helping us impact those around us. If you have any questions or want to get more connected, you can text us at the number on the screen or by visiting aldersgate.info. Thanks again for being here with us today. It's time for our online experience to begin right now.
Let praise be a weapon that silences the enemy. Let praise be a weapon that conquers all anxiety. Let it rise. Let praise arise. We sing your name in the dark and it changes everything. We sing with all we are and we claim your victory. Let it rise, let praise arise. We'll see you break down every wall. We'll watch the giants fall. We cannot survive when we praise you. The God of breakthroughs on our side. Forever lift him high. With all creation cry, God, we praise you. Oh, we praise you. Oh, let faith be the song that overcomes the raging sea. Let faith be the song that calms the storm inside of me. Let it rise. Let faith arise. Oh, we'll see you break down every wall. We'll watch the giants fall. We cannot survive when we praise you. The God of breakthroughs on our side. Forever lift him high. With all creation cry, God, we praise you. Oh, we praise you. Oh, we praise you. Oh, we praise you. Oh. This is what living looks like. This is what freedom feels like. This is what heaven sounds like. We praise you, we praise you. This is what living looks like. This is what freedom feels like. This is what heaven sounds like. We praise you, we praise you. This is what living looks like. This is what freedom feels like. This is what heaven watch the giants fall. Fear cannot survive when we praise you. The God of breakthroughs on our side, forever lift him high. With whole creation cry, God, we praise you. Oh, we praise you. Oh, we praise you. Oh, we praise you. Oh, we praise you, Lord. Here is where I lay it down, every burden, every crown. This is my surrender. This is my surrender. Here is where I lay it down, every lie and every doubt. This is my surrender. I will make room for you to do whatever you want to, do whatever you want to. Oh, I will make room for you, do whatever you want to, do whatever you want to. Yeah. Here is where I lay it down, every burden, every crown. This is my surrender. This is my surrender. Here is where I lay it down, every lie and every doubt. This is my surrender. Oh, and I will make room for you. Do whatever you want to, do whatever you want to. Oh, I will make room for you. Do whatever you want to, do whatever you want to. Yeah. Come and do whatever you want to. Shake up the ground of all my tradition, break down the walls of all my religion. Your way is better. Your way is better. Shake up the ground of all my tradition, break down the walls of all my religion. Your way is better. Your way is better. Oh, shake up the ground of all my tradition, break down the walls of all my religion. Your way is better. Your way is better. Shake up the ground of all my tradition, break down the walls of you. Do whatever you want to. Do whatever you want to. Here is where I lay it down. You are all I'm chasing now. This is my surrender. This is my surrender. Here is where I lay it down. You are all I'm chasing now. This is my surrender. This is my surrender.
The news bombards us with new social and political issues every day. From social justice to racism to sexuality and everything in between. How do we respond to these issues, and what do we say when confronted with these confounding topics?
Well, thanks for jumping in on this conversation with us today. I hope you've been engaged in all of these conversations as we've been in this series called In the News. We're taking different topics and issues that surround us in the world we live in today and asking ourselves, what does the gospel have to say about these things? And in today's conversation, we're going to be talking about the gospel and abortion. Now, interestingly enough, the Bible never uses the word abortion. Yet the Bible has a whole lot to say about the issue of abortion. Abortion is certainly a political issue, a very contested and well-debated political issue, but it's also a gospel issue. And so in today's conversation, we really want to look at what the gospel has to say on the issue of abortion, not what it has to say about party politics. And so with that, as with all of these conversations, I want us to jump into a Jesus story or a story that Jesus shares. It's in John chapter 9. So if you got a Bible there in front of you or your app on your phone or whatever, I would encourage you to go to John chapter 9. And really the whole chapter of John 9 is about this story. I'm going to look at just the first few verses of the story, but I would encourage you to read and study the whole story. And it's really an amazing story about this man who was born blind. And one day as Jesus and his disciples are passing through his village, Jesus sees the man and heals the man. But in the process of healing, the disciples ask Jesus, whose fault is it that this man was born blind? Was it his fault or his parents' fault? And basically what they're asking is who sinned and caused his blindness? Because that was a very well-known perception in first century culture, is that if someone had a handicap or a disability, then someone sinned, either that person or the parent. There was a generational sin somewhere along the way. And so the disciples want to know who sinned. And Jesus basically says, no one. He's born blind. He's blind, and God's glory is going to be displayed in his life. And so he puts some mud on the guy's eye, tells him to go to the pool and bathe in the pool, and he's healed. And then there's this whole story. Everyone wants to know, how are you healed? And I want us to look at this story today. And you may be going, what does this have to do with abortion? Well, let's look at the story. So John chapter 9, verse 1, it says, as he is Jesus, as he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. He saw a man blind from birth. I'm going to give us 4 different take-homes today. And the first take-home is this: God sees you. God saw the blind man. Jesus saw him. Maybe there was a crowd, maybe not, but the point is Jesus saw him, and Jesus sees you too. He knows where you are. He knows what your need is. God sees you. Psalm 139 is a well-known place in Scripture. And in Psalm 139, the author of the Psalm, David, talks about God seeing us. And let me just share a little bit of it with you in today's conversation. Starting in verse 1, it says, "O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You know my thoughts. You search out my path and my lying down. You're acquainted with all my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, you know it altogether. You hem me in behind and before. You lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me." Verse 7, "Where shall I go from your spirit? Or where should I flee from your presence? If I go to heaven, you're there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me." I can continue, but what David is saying here is God sees you. Everything about you. There's a story in the Old Testament in Genesis chapter 16. It's the story of Abraham and Sarah, and really Sarah's servant Hagar. And Sarah and Abraham have been promised that they're going to have, even in their old age, that they're going to have a child. In fact, Abraham's going to be the father of many nations, but yet they can't conceive and they can't get pregnant. And so Sarah kind of takes things into her own hands. This was kind of common there in the culture. And so she has Abraham sleep with her servant Hagar, and Hagar becomes pregnant. And then there becomes this envy and jealousy because Sarah still can't conceive, and Abraham is conceived with her servant. And so she begins to treat her servant Hagar harshly and sends her out into the wilderness. And there she's in the wilderness and she feels left all alone. No one sees her. No one knows anything about her. And an angel of the Lord shows up. And we know from the Old Testament that usually when that happens, it's Jesus himself who shows up. And Jesus says, "You're not alone. You are seen." In fact, Hagar goes on to say there in Genesis chapter 16, verse 13, "You are the God who sees me. Surely I have seen him who looks after me." God sees you. And today, in this conversation about abortion, that's so true for all of us. But specifically at the very beginning of this message, I want to speak to those of you who have had an abortion, to those of you who know someone who's had an abortion. In fact, statistics tell us that 1 out of every 3 American women have either had or probably will have an abortion at some point in their life. If that's you, here's what I want you to know. God sees you. The blind man in the story in John chapter 9, he didn't have an abortion. He didn't have an unplanned pregnancy. But he knows the feelings that come with an unplanned pregnancy because as a blind man in this culture, he was alone, he was scared, and he was confused. And really his whole life was defined by his blindness. And perhaps if you've struggled with an abortion, then you feel like that's how you're defined and that's how your life has defined you. But listen, you're not defined by before abortion or after abortion. You are defined by before healing and after healing. God is the God who sees you. Yes, we have to be clear about a holy God and how he views life and how he views abortion. But we also have to be clear about a loving God who sees you, loves you, forgives you. And so I want you to know today that you are seen and you are loved. And that is to all of us. In the story in John chapter 9, verse 2, it says, his disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" And I love what Eugene Peterson does here in response to that question in his translation of the Bible, The Message. He replies in his paraphrase. He says, Jesus said, "You're asking the wrong question. It's not who sinned, his parents or him. You're asking the wrong question." And isn't that what we tend to do? We tend to start with the wrong question. We tend to focus on the brokenness or the places where things aren't right, or we tend to start in those places. And Jesus says here, that's not where you need to start. And where we need to start is at the very beginning. It's not in the brokenness that happened in Genesis chapter 3 after the fall and after sin entered the world. It's before that where we're created in God's image. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 27 says we are created in God's image. And because we are created in God's image, all of us are created in God's image. There's this incredible value to life, to all life, to everyone's life, because that life is created in the very image of God. Again, if we go to Psalm 139, and I'm going to flip through the Bible here, and I would encourage you to do that with me, either in the Bible or on your phone. But if you go to Psalm 139, we can continue to read there. It's just beautiful poetry that David uses here. If I'm going to start in verse 13 this time, it says, "For you formed me in my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth." Verse 16, listen to this. "Your eyes saw my unformed substance." Jesus sees you. "In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, yet there was none of them." God not only sees you, listen, God knows you. And when we begin with this concept of being made in His image and begin to understand what it means for God to know us. If you flip over from Psalms to the Old Testament prophet of Jeremiah, you'll see in Jeremiah chapter 1, when the prophet begins to talk about his calling, here's what he says in verse 5. He says, "The word of the Lord came to me saying, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you." That's not just Jeremiah, that's you as well. That's any life that God brings. God knows you even before you're formed in the womb. Before you were consecrated, I appointed you a prophet to the nations. And that's just not Old Covenant. In the New Covenant, Paul tells us the same thing. He says that about himself in Galatians chapter 1, verses 15 and 16. Galatians 1, 15 and 16, here's what Paul says about himself. "But when He, God, who had set me apart before I was born, and who called me by His grace." You see, Paul recognized too that God knew him before he was even formed in his mother's womb. You see, God is sovereign. God has the ultimate authority over all of creation. And as part of that creation, male and female, we are made in His image, and we have divine value being made in His image. And the sovereignty of God means that He has authority then over the life of male and female. That means that God is the giver of life. In the Old Testament book of Job, you read a lot about this. In fact, in Job chapter 12, verse 10, it's that God alone has the authority to give life. It also says God is the only one that has the authority to take life. Job chapter 1, verse 21. Job chapter 14, verse 5 says our days are numbered, that God knows that. There's another verse in Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 39, that God is the giver and God is the taker of life. And so in the conversation of abortion, we need to be clear that abortion undermines God's sovereignty, that we don't have the authority to take life. Only God has that authority to give and to take life. Because not only does God see you, God knows you even before you're formed in the womb. So in John chapter 9, in the story of the blind man, the disciples want to know, who sinned, this man or his parents? And Jesus' response is interesting. Verse 3, it was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. That the glory of God might be displayed in him. That the works of God might be displayed in him. Let me say that a different way. That God not only sees you and knows you, but that he proclaims you. That he's crazy about you and that he wants his glory to be revealed in your life. He wants his glory to be revealed in all life. Because again, we're made in his image and there's value in all life. In the story, what happens is Jesus puts clay into the man's eyes and then he tells him to go jump into the pool. And after he does that, the blind man is able to see. This was not the only place in the Gospels where Jesus heals a blind man. In fact, in Matthew chapter 9, Jesus heals 2 blind men, but here's how he does it. He merely touches their eyes and they're able to see. In Mark chapter 8, Jesus put spittle in a blind man's eyes. You know what spittle is? He spit in the dirt, mixed it together, and then put it in the blind man's eyes, and the blind man was able to see. And here, he puts clay in the blind man's eyes and then tells him to go jump into a pool. In all of these cases, Jesus heals a man that was blind, but he does it in different ways. Why? Well, I think the reason why is because Jesus didn't want us to get confused with the method. He wanted us to focus on the message. There wasn't one way that Jesus healed all of the blind men that he healed. There was lots of ways, but there was one message, and the message is this: that God is all about doing his work of glory in your life and in all life. He proclaims you, and he proclaims all life. There's this great verse at the very end of the book of Genesis when all of this has happened with Jacob and Joseph, and it's an incredible story. Just go study it. But there was a lot of tragedy. And in the end of that story, there's this one statement. It's Genesis chapter 50, verse 20. And here's what it basically says. What the enemy meant for evil, God turned to good. You see, that's the point of this whole story, is the disciples want to know, well, who sinned? And see, they started with the wrong question. They started with the brokenness. And Jesus said, no. Let's start with the glory. Yes, the enemy means to take brokenness and use it against us, but God takes that and uses it for good. Romans chapter 8, verse 28 verse says that God works good in all things. And when we're having this conversation about life, we need to understand that in all life, God works good. And glory is revealed in all of life, not just the lives that we choose. There's one other thing I want to share with you in this story, and it's this. God not only sees you, God not only knows you, God not only proclaims you, but God delights in you. See, it's the part of the story where Jesus says, we must work the works of him who sent me. In other words, Jesus told the blind man to go wash into the pool of Siloam. And that word Siloam there means which is sent. And what we need to understand is that we then are sent to do the works of the one who sent us. We are sent to do the works of God. And God delights in us when we partner with him to bring his glory to fruition in our lives and in other people's lives. We are all sent to partner with him in bringing that glory into life. And sometimes in the abortion conversation, the word term gets brought up. So when does life begin and what's the term and all of that? I think sometimes what we do is we focus too much on that whole term concept. It's like insurance policies. You can take out a term life insurance policy or you can take out a whole life insurance policy. And we want to focus on the term life insurance policy, but really when it comes to life, we want to focus on the whole life insurance. In other words, it's not just a debate about when does life begin. It's a debate about all of life and the whole life. You see, what the Bible speaks to is life that's not just term, but whole. And when we talk about sanctity of life, we don't just talk about sanctity of life in the womb. We talk about sanctity of life at all ages, across all stages of life. Here's another way to say it. We often refer to abortion in the womb, but there's also a realization of abortion on the way to the tomb. And life is from womb to tomb, not just in the womb. I know that may sound confusing. Let me try to clarify that. So, in Matthew chapter 25, Jesus gives an illustration of the final judgment. And there he talks about how we do this to the least of these, to those that are hungry, those that are thirsty, those that are naked, those that are homeless, those that are in prison. And that's what it means to focus on all of life. But let me put it to you this way. Let's talk about those that are hungry and thirsty. Let's talk about poverty. Did you know that 1/2 of the world's population lives on less than $2 a day? And 1 out of every 3 people on the globe don't have access to clean drinking water. Let me bring it closer to home. I don't know where you're watching from or listening from, but right here in Lubbock, Texas, 1 out of every 5 persons lives in poverty. And on the streets of Lubbock, there are at least 280 people who don't have a roof over their head. And that's even hard to track because so much of that is transient and changes day by day. What's the point? What am I trying to say? What I'm trying to say is we focus on whole life, not term life. And if we're passionate about being pro-life, then we need to be passionate about being pro-life at all stages of life, which means we're called to do the works of the one who sent us to bring life to those who are living in poverty. We're called to bring life to those who become orphans. There are 125,000 abortions performed per day across the globe. That's what the recent statistics tell us. But also every day, did you know that 5,700 children become orphans? Did you know that bringing it closer to home, right here in Lubbock County, we are ranked number 1 in the entire state of Texas in child abuse? And that there are 458 kids waiting for adoption right here in Lubbock County. 458 kids waiting adoption in Lubbock County. Do you know how many churches there are in the city of Lubbock? 403. So if each church just had one family that was willing to adopt one kid, we could take all of those orphans in Lubbock County and give them a home. James 1:27 says that's true religion, to take care of the orphans and the widows. Jesus also mentions those in prison in Matthew chapter 25. And here at Aldersgate, we have a ministry to the county jail. And we have people that go out and minister there every week. Listen, I could go on and on and on and on. The point I'm trying to make is this. If we're going to be passionate about life, we must be passionate about all life. Not just life in the womb. We must be passionate about all life from womb to tomb. And God sent us to partner with Him in bringing life to those who need life. And He delights in us when we do that. You know, the interesting thing, if you keep reading through the rest of the story in John chapter 9, is that the question that kept coming up over and over and over and over is, how were you healed? And everybody wanted to know, how did this happen? How did this take place? And again, they're asking the wrong question. The question is, who healed you? In this conversation, I've said to us, Jesus sees you, He knows you, He proclaims you, and He delights in you. The question is, who heals you? Do you see Jesus? Do you know Jesus? Do you proclaim Jesus? And do you delight in Jesus? That's the real question.